Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Barry Vesser, and I am with the Climate Center. We are a nonprofit organization in California, and we work on climate and clean energy policy at the state capitol in Sacramento. We're working on policy at speed and scale, aligned with the science. And we believe that what happens in California influences the rest of the United States and also has some influence in other parts of the world. So I'm going to tell you about a few news items today, and hopefully, I hope, sell you or interest you in a technology that we think is going to be very important to getting to our 100% renewable goals for the global community. And let's remember that that is really the backbone of lots of other sectors' emissions reduction. So it's an important thing to get to as quickly as possible. So the news, of course, for people in my part of the globe was all about the election. Didn't turn out the way a lot of us wanted. I'm here to tell you that in California, our climate commitment is unwavering. It's easy to say that, right? But I want to give you a couple of data points that have happened in the last 2 weeks to actually show you what California is doing. First thing is the governor called a special session of the legislature because he wanted to make sure that we defend California's values, our agency rulemaking, and our lawmaking as the new administration comes in. And he's talking about actually dedicating resources in the budget, both for legal avenues and other avenues to do that. And of course, climate is a top priority. The second one, which I'm very excited about because we, with a lot of our partners in California, over 180 organizations working together, got on our ballot initiative a ballot. It was for a climate bond, and that climate bond is for $10 billion to be spent over the next 10 years. And it funds everything from wildfire mitigation to dealing with extreme drought, to extreme heat, to getting offshore wind started and kick-started in California. So very significant expenditure for the state. The last thing I want to I almost skipped over one. The other thing I want to mention to you is a new law. The Climate Center was part of working on this bill. The reason I feel it's so important is that it will lay the foundation of EVs, electric vehicles, as an incredibly important part of getting us to 100% clean energy in the electricity sector. I also want to just mention to you parenthetically that we are releasing a report called Envisioning the California Grid for the Future: Clean, Affordable, Reliable, Resilient, Equitable, and Safe. And that will be coming out in the next week. It'll be on our website. And what I'm going to tell you today is sort of a sneak peek into part of that. I'm just like looking at one lens that I think is actually applicable everywhere and is not dependent on the way the California energy system is particularly configured. So this is the vision. But before I launch into vision, I should probably do at least a quick explainer. What is a bidirectional EV? So an electric vehicle can take a charge from the grid, right? And that powers your car until that battery discharges that energy and then you refill it. Well, a bidirectional EV can take a charge from the grid, but it can also give a charge back to the grid or send it to your house. So that means it can back up your house when there's an outage, including a load in your house like a refrigerator or your air conditioning, or it can back up the whole house. So that's bidirectionality. And we want to see that California becomes a world leader in modeling how this can be used to help make the grid more stable. Bidirectional vehicles can be seen as grid resilience assets. As we have more extreme climate impacts, and we're having this in California now, wildfires, droughts, floods. These all have impacts on the electrical grid, and these vehicles provide backup for both homes and also emergency centers, and I'll talk a little bit about that more in a bit. Energy reliability assets. So one of the most important things about an electricity system is that when you flip the switch, the light comes on, right? Well, California, over the last 5 years, has had increasing outages on the grid. So these vehicles can help us by providing storage capacity, make the grid more reliable as a whole, not just your particular home, but the whole grid. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. They can also lower the costs of EV ownership. This is extremely important everywhere in the world because EVs are just a little too expensive right now. And we want them to come down that cost curve so everyone can afford them. They are an energy management tool. And what that means is that you can store energy in your battery in your car when prices are cheap, which in California in most places is in the middle of the day, right? Because you have solar coming in, and that's a very cheap time to get energy. In the evening, when the prices go up, that's when you can discharge your battery. So you're not paying the highest prices for electricity. And then finally, it's a GHG reduction strategy, a greenhouse gas emissions reduction strategy. How? Well, in California, and again, lots of other places in the world, when the grids get stressed, when there's a high demand on the grid, that is when we use the dirtiest power. In California, it's pretty old natural gas peaker plants. They're very dirty, and they're very often located in low-income communities. So I want to talk a little bit about the need. Why do we need these vehicles? Why are they really all that important? I mean, it's nice to be able to back up your home, right? But that's not earth-shattering technology. The California Energy Commission tells us that to get to our 100% clean energy goal, and in California, that's 2045, so various countries have different targets for that, but most countries are striving to move in that direction. So in California, we've been investing in this, keep in mind, for decades. We still need to have 3 times the amount of renewable energy that we currently have on the grid, and we need to have 8 times the battery storage. Now that's important because that's a lot of storage, and utility scale storage is still very expensive. So here are all these EVs coming with their batteries to a driveway near you, and they are completely underutilized. What the state has to do is figure out a way to use that capacity that's affordable both for the car owner and for ratepayers. So this is also just to give you a sense of the scale of this resource. It is absolutely enormous. So this chart shows that blue line is the entire electricity demand in the United States projected in the future. So that's all the electric facilities in the United States working at capacity. That teal line that's going up off the screen, that's the expected battery capacity of EVs as they get purchased in the United States. So by 2027, 2028, it's going to, those EVs will have more capacity than all the natural gas electrification fleet in the United States. By 2035, they will surpass all resources, solar, wind, nuclear, coal, all of them combined. So it's an enormous asset that is just sitting there unused right now. So this is as I said at the beginning of my slide said, this is a bit of a California case study. So this is just to give you the sense in one place. California Energy Commission estimates that there will be 8 million EVs on the road in California by 2030. Right now, there are about 2 million EVs, just under. If 5 million of those EVs were bidirectionally enabled and utilized, they would store enough energy to back up every home in California for a day. Another way to say that is that it's about 50 gigawatts of capacity. And to give you a sense of what a gigawatt is, in California, there's a nuclear facility. It's by far the largest electricity producing facility in California. It's 2.2 gigawatts. So we're talking 50 gigawatts of power. That's comparable to the highest usage in history in California. So again, this is a very big asset for the country and also for the state. So another distressing thing that's been happening in California is as we have these more extreme climate events, people are noticing that the power is down, and so they've been purchasing diesel backup generators at record levels. So between 2018 and 2021, purchases of diesel generators in the Bay Area, right, which is a pretty clean, groovy place, but they went up 34%. EVs can be a far cleaner, far more affordable way of doing this. And let's remember, too, that those diesel generators, when they're not in use, they're just sitting there. They're an idle asset that you're getting no value out of until you actually have a power outage. EVs, on the other hand, can be used the entire time to arbitrage energy, either at your home or for your business. And this is happening in some places, small ways. That picture of that Nissan Leaf is in Japan, and the Japanese are using these EVs as mobile disaster backup units. That's our Governor Gavin Newsom there on the right, and he's speaking about vehicle-to-grid at Moxion, which is a company that has these huge batteries. You can sort of see them there behind him. They're enormous batteries, and they take them around California when there's a disaster, and they need to back up a fire station or a medical unit or a police station. So a better way to do that would have the trucks themselves be EVs and use the truck batteries. I mentioned earlier that relying on electric vehicles could help us reduce gas peaker plants. This is really important in California. You can see these brown dots are where those peaker plants are located. If you overlaid where low-income areas in California were, 50% of these peaker plants are located in low-income communities of color. So these are communities that already have high mortality and morbidity associated with poor air quality, and we're making that air quality worse. This is a way that we could close those facilities down. In case you're thinking like, well, maybe this is an interesting idea, but is it really ready for prime time? So on the left of this screen, those are all companies that have expressed an interest or said they will be rolling out some model of EV that's bidirectional. On the right, those are companies that have put a stake in the ground. So Tesla has said they will have their entire fleet be bidirectionally enabled by 2025. GM has said by 2026. PG&E, which is the largest utility in California, has said that we need these electric vehicles to keep the lights on. Now, that might lead you to say, well, maybe this is going to happen anyway. Do we really need policy to get this done? We want to see bidirectionality be available for everyone, like seat belts. This is something that is a public good, and it adds value to the homeowner for anyone who has one of these vehicles. The companies are going to add these on as an added service, usually probably on higher end vehicles. So I mentioned earlier there was a law in California. It was called SB 59 by Senator Skinner. This is a law about providing the California Energy Commission the authority to decide that bidirectionality will be required in certain vehicle classes. And I'll talk a little bit about what classes really make sense there. We had over 100 organizations supporting this. Our co-sponsors were the Union of Concerned Scientists and Nuvve, which is a company that does work in this space, making it easier for EVs to be bidirectionally enabled. And I think that's all I'll say on that. Having a policy on bidirectionality means that utility planners can count on those resources being there. It starts making them large enough that they can aggregate them. So we all know that, let's say all 8 million vehicles in California were bidirectionally enabled. Not everybody's going to use that, right? Maybe 5 or 10% of the total will use that. But that is enough as long as grid planners have some idea of what the total is and what the programs out there are. So it just means that they can run the grid much more efficiently and cleaner. So I want to just also knock down a couple of myths. When we were pushing this bill through the legislature, at first, all the auto companies were against it. By the end of the bill, they had all moved to neutral. So they weren't opposing it, but they weren't coming out in support of it either. And one of the big concerns was that making EVs bidirectional would make them more expensive. This was debunked in testimony in the state legislature. Basically, it's a software upgrade. So maybe you're talking about $100, $200 tops to the cost of a vehicle. These vehicles average probably, in the $50,000 to $60,000 range. So fairly insignificant cost. And the thing on the right there is just showing you these are all the incentives that are offered in California and the United States for different classes of EVs. And that cost of software I just mentioned to you, that's small compared to the rebates. So people are getting rebated a lot more than this little bit of additional cost that's being added on to provide a public good. So I said earlier that there would be cost savings for ratepayers and also EV owners. A study was done in California showing that we could save $1 billion a year for California ratepayers by putting this into effect. And then I mentioned earlier, there's this idea of peak shaving, and what that means is when demand is high for electricity, it's costly in California, and many other parts of the world are moving to what they call time of use rates. This allows you to use energy at those high times by drawing it off your battery and then replenishing that energy when it's cheap again. So I mentioned earlier that there's some use cases that make a lot of sense. This is one, this should be happening globally, school buses. So school buses have a very clear and set duty cycle. And most of the time, they're just sitting around doing nothing but gathering dust. They have enormous battery capacity. And these are 3 different programs, all of which targeted school buses. And you can see in one, which was in California, they saved $7,000 per vehicle. One in Rhode Island, $12,000 per vehicle. And finally, the last one, $3,000 per vehicle. I mentioned earlier that there are different things. There's vehicle-to-grid integration. There's what they call V2L or V2H, and that just means vehicle-to-load. And a load is just like your refrigerator, your cooling system in your house, your laptop. You can back those things up individually, or you could back up your whole panel on your house. And the other thing I wanted to note here is that there's companies out there, Tesla is one of them, that have stationary storage products. And people in California have been buying these things because, as I said, we have a reliability issue, and they want to make sure they're going to be safe if the grid goes down. Those batteries cost often about $14,000 a piece. So think about this. You've got an EV sitting in your driveway because you bought it to get you around. You have that battery there. That battery is 6 times more powerful than a Tesla Powerwall. Powerwall maybe is going to back up your house for a day. That car can back up your house for 3 days. So this is really quite a substantial resource for the consumer. then this is another concern people have about taking this approach of using the vehicle batteries. Won't it affect battery health and the life of the battery? And actually, they've done a couple of different studies here showing that one study showed over 8 years that had 2% impact on battery duration, the other a 1 to 2% in 5 years. They have software now that really manages the charging and discharging of the batteries. So that is something that is not really an issue. There's a very small effect, and with the software we have now, it's managed quite ably. So I'm going to wrap here. I told you at the beginning that we see this as foundational. So this is the pyramid of getting to a much more functional grid that is going to provide benefits for all of us. It starts with making the vehicles bidirectionally enabled. Why do you start there? The reason is because right now, the thing I haven't told you is that charging for these EVs is more expensive. If you buy a charger for your home, it's going to be more expensive than a traditional charger if it's bidirectionally enabled. And people have a question about that in the Q&A, I can explain why. But it is more expensive. If we make all these vehicles bidirectional, what that's going to do is it's going to make those chargers be mass marketed, and the prices are going to come down the cost curve very quickly. So it's very important that that happens first. At the same time, simultaneously, agencies will be making standards, certifications to make sure that these charging systems are all interoperable. And that's another reason we don't want to leave this just to the vehicle manufacturers, because they are all going to be looking for their proprietary product that they're going to sell you that won't work with anybody else's. We don't want that. Integrations with other things like rooftop solar and battery storage, that's the next level. And then finally, tariffs. What is tariffs? It's just a fancy way of saying incentives. So you own an EV. What's your utility going to pay you so that they can use 10 to 20% of your battery when they need it and aggregate that across your whole neighborhood, everybody who has an EV? This is important. They did a study in Denmark on this with a bunch of Nissan Leafs, and people there saved $6,000 a year. So think of that versus a fossil fuel vehicle. There's just no comparison, right? You can't get that capability. You're getting extra capability, and you're also getting reduced costs. So I'm going to end there, and I think we have time for a few questions. Do we? Any questions? Please. Okay. Ask short questions, and I'll give short answers.
It's Masato Kimura, Japanese freelance journalist. My question is about Chinese production power of EV. And so on the other hand, Germany and Japanese car makers is struggling to produce a reasonable EV. And how do you think the future of EV in California? Is there a lot of Chinese EV or Tesla or something else?
Yes. And we'll go to you next. I'm going to answer that question while she's walking back there. So right now, EVs are 25% of new car sales in California. I think we have a robust future. The state is investing a lot in charging infrastructure. I wish some of them would be Chinese EVs, but they're going to put tariffs on Chinese EVs to make them harder to sell in America. That's the short answer. Please. Why don't we go to you, and then we'll go to her.
Thank you. My question is about when you want to reach 100% of clean energy with EV. So how is it about the component of these batteries to produce this clean energy? Because the most needed components are from non-renewable natural resources. So how do you manage these two things of going to reach 100% of EV or clean energy and non-renewable natural resources that are the main component of these batteries, and from some countries that are poor, and maybe the production of these components are maybe also contributing to the climate degradation. Yeah, that is my two questions.
Thank you. That was a great question, and I'm going to try and answer this really quickly. It deserves a longer answer, but I'll say this: that it is true that some resources used in EV batteries are non-renewable. They are doing a lot of things with battery technology to reduce reliance on those for a whole host of reasons. And the other thing that's happening is there's already a pretty big market in the United States for recycling these batteries. So what we want to do is get to a place where we have solid-state batteries, less of these materials, and we're recycling the materials that we are using. That's the short answer, and I'm happy to talk to you more about this afterwards. Do we have time for the last question?
Hello, I'm Xue from Bochu Recycling Technologies. My question is whether you also consider the battery swapping, except for battery charging, and also how do you deal with the battery recycling? Thank you.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear your whole question.
First question is battery swapping. That you don't need to charge the battery, but you replace the battery. Yeah. And second question is about the battery recycling.
You want me to say more about the battery recycling? It's a fairly new industry in the United States where they're buying back batteries at a fairly cheap amount and restoring them and then reselling them. Sometimes they're being repurposed as EV batteries, and sometimes they're being used as stationary storage. And I'm happy to talk to you more afterwards as well. Thank you all so much. I really appreciate your attention, and have a great conference.